So exactly who you put people in the bin of, how you put people in the bin of Black, Caucasian, and Asian, let's say, which are generally regarded as the three major racial groups, that's far from obvious. And so that's a basic scientific conundrum that's right at the bottom of the IQ problem. But if you use the typical groupings, you do get ethnic differences. And that starts to become extremely problematic, because the question then is why? Right. And with the answer to that is we don't know. And some of them, like, so you think, well, the most commonly discussed ethnic difference is the propensity for people who are defined as Black, the way that Americans define Black, to perform more poorly on standardized tests. And so then the accusation is that the tests are somehow biased, or that there's socioeconomic factors.
The alt-right may be very, very hard to pin down or find, and anyone who would be a member of it would be able to get a lot of publicity, and sort of has in some ways. A couple of people who you'd identify have never had more coverage than they have by being identified in this way. But I sense there's something, there are things that are murmuring under the discussion on the right. It seems to me that me at any rate, very, very uncomfortable, very worried. And the one that I started to notice a little while ago was probably in the last year or so. It was the increase of people, Q&A, sometimes, meet and greet sort of things after speeches, where I found that almost always there was at least one person who asked me about IQ. Mm-hmm. Now that had never happened until about a year or two ago. I never got asked about that. For a long time I sort of said, it's not my thing, I don't know about it, I don't, that's why I haven't discussed it. But it was always a sort of thing of, you should look into it, and I could never quite put my finger on why I was uncomfortable about it, other than the fact that I knew that somebody who raised it first was somebody I was innately suspicious of.
Well, there is a danger on the right, that the identity politics danger, because the right will play identity politics different than the left. The leftist theory is, well, we should all segregate ourselves into our identity groups, and then those who are the oppressor groups should repent and feel terrible for their oppressive acts and step aside. And that's one way of playing identity politics. But another way of playing identity politics is, to hell with you. I will pick my identity group based on race or ethnicity, whatever it is that I feel most comfortable with, since that's the game, and then I'll play to win. Right. And my sense is that there will be plenty of people attracted to the identity politics game that you win. And the people who've gone after me from the right wing have basically gone after me for exactly that reason. They say Peterson stresses individuality and individual responsibility, but fails entirely to appreciate the fact that we do manifest ourselves in groups, which is exactly the same thing that the radical leftists argue, and that it's necessary for those of us who wish to preserve our culture, etc., to group together in our homogenous group and act collectively to, what would you say? Take our territory back, something like that. And that's very much a fascist perspective, fundamentally. But it's if the fundamental game is identity politics, it isn't obvious why the logical choice is to lose. So now, when I discuss this, I tell people that the whole idea that you should view the world through the lens that makes your collective identity paramount is a pathological game, no matter who's playing it, because it produces a reversion to divisive tribalism, and small, diverse tribes of people mostly fight.
But why do you think the IQ and the IQ differentials question has become a sort of such a edge issue for some people? Why that one?
Well, the IQ literature in general is a what would you call it? It's an ethical nightmare. Sure. I think that the right-wingers who are using IQ as a lever use it to buttress claims of ethnic and group superiority.
Yeah.
And of course, that's partly why the left, the possibility that that might occur is partly why the left has objected to, we could say, IQ research since, well, probably for the last 30 years. It's interesting though, because when the IQ tests were first developed, they were developed in France, and then they were used in England for years by left-leaning parties to screen, and this was part of a conscious plan to produce upward social mobility, idea that you could objectively assess intellectual prowess, allowed the selection of, let's call them deserving poor, using the Victorian or the Edwardian terminology, that you could identify people who were of great intellectual promise amongst the working class and pull them up into the educated middle class or elite, and that would be of benefit to them and everyone else. But the problem with IQ tests is that they do produce group differences. Yeah. And that's unbelievably complicated and horrible. Yeah. And it's complicated because it isn't obvious how you should group people if you're going to do group analysis of IQ. So for example, there's more genetic diversity among Africans than there is among the remaining, all the other human populations. So exactly who you put people in the bin of, how you put people in the bin of Black, Caucasian, and Asian, let's say, which are generally regarded as the three major racial groups, that's far from obvious. And so that's a basic scientific conundrum that's right at the bottom of the IQ problem. But if you use the typical groupings, you do get ethnic differences. And that starts to become extremely problematic, because the question then is why? Right. And with the answer to that is we don't know. And some of them, so you think, well, the most commonly discussed ethnic difference is the propensity for people who are defined as Black, the way that Americans define Black, to perform more poorly on standardized tests. And so then the accusation is that the tests are somehow biased, or that there's socioeconomic factors at work, or perhaps at the bottom of the desirability hierarchy that there are biological factors at work, and no one has nailed any of that down.
Well, just fascinating to hear Jordan Peterson, talk about IQ tests. And when you see Douglas Murray posing these questions, you can see that he's really thinking about how he's going to phrase the question, because he wants to make sure that his question doesn't come out to sound obviously racist or bigoted. And even if it doesn't sound that way, that the people on the left, those libtards, the leftists, the progressives, those liberals, they're going to be out there looking for anything that they can basically, pounce on to anybody that's going to enter into this conversation. But one of the things that that Jordan was talking about is the fact that these standardized IQ tests, well, one of the things that the left has always been critical of is to say that because Blacks in America have performed on these standardized tests poorly, well, a lot of people will take that to mean when people say that the standardized test scores, are biased, or that they're prejudiced towards, people of color, to minorities. And I don't think that the word, I think prejudice is too strong a word. But the fact of the matter is that if you have children that are not at the same educational level because of a whole variety of factors, and I don't think it has anything to do with race or ethnicity or heritage or anything like that. I think it has to do with a bunch of environmental and socioeconomic factors. Because you could take a white child, a Black child, a brown child, whatever color, it doesn't really matter. That's how we take these things in terms when we group think. And we take children according to their race or demographics or ethnicity or whatever. If they didn't have a solid educational foundation from the beginning, or if they've been sheltered from what are societal norms and what everybody sort of takes for granted in terms of words and terminology and language and those kind of things, then I think that when you take these standardized tests, you are going to see huge differences. But that doesn't have anything to do with the intelligence of the person. It's just the fact of the matter. Like, for example, if I were to take a IQ test and it was based on Chinese, Chinese, I don't know, society, Chinese culture, Chinese history, I wouldn't do good in that at all unless I was well versed in Chinese history from the beginning. Same way, if a Chinese student is taking an IQ test and there are questions on that are basically, you would say, on American history, then the score comes out and you say, oh, the Chinese person didn't score well. Well, that was because his historical knowledge may not be as great as somebody else knowing American history. But now you take these tests where they do on mathematics. Well, mathematics is math, whether you're in America, you're in China, you're in Japan, you're here, you're there, all over the world. Math is math. And so why is it that the Asian students do much, much better on mathematical applications, mathematical problems, than counterparts around the world? Or for that matter, Jewish people. Now, could there be a difference there in terms of that? That could be something. But then you could take a standardized test in the arts, in sciences, biology, physics, other types of things, and find differences as well. And when Jordan Peterson was talking about the egalitarian way in the old Victorian England, we're taking, people from the working class, the Pippi Longstocking effect, or the Pippi Longstocking phenomenon, as I like to call it, and giving these standardized tests to these people, and then finding out who was scoring at the top levels, the cream of the crop, so to speak, and then bringing up them into the middle class or upper middle class or the elites. Well, what were they doing? Giving them an educational. These students already were found that whatever aptitude tests they took allowed them to be weeded out, to be known for obviously a greater propensity of knowledge that they had, for them to rise to the cream of the crop in these standardized tests, and then to enhance that by introducing them to even more of what society has to offer. But again, that could be that slippery slope too, which is what Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray are talking about. Anyways, let's get back to more of the interview between these two. And you're watching the Dr. Nasser Sheikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasser, where this is what we have on tap for you folks. Let's get back to the interview right now.
If you give that data credence, then it leaves you with the terrible question of what do you do about those differences and how do you conceptualize them? But it can also be used as a justification for a kind of racial hierarchy. Yeah. But then if you reverse it, you see the reverse problem emerging with the issue of Ashkenazi Jews, because they're overrepresented in most positions of competence, let's say, and authority. Radically overrepresented, especially at the top. And unless you're willing to posit something like IQ differential that will account for it, you have to come up with a conspiratorial theory. And so with IQ, this is the thing about IQ research, is that no matter how you interpret it, you're basically screwed. Yeah. And it's partly because the facts of the world don't necessarily line up with our a priori moral desires. Because what we would really like would be for there to be no important differences in important function across all the groups that people are put in or identify with. But it doesn't work out that way.
One of the problems that I've been thinking about it for a while, it's such an edge issue, and it's, as I say, I sort of fear it coming in somehow to a much more mainstream position unless there's an attitude taken towards it. Obviously it seems that the left has been trying for a long time, and other people have, to just keep it away, as you say, since the bell curve at least, and for time before that, just keep it away as a discussion. It's obviously bubbling away, and so it seems that you have to find some attitude towards it, other than
well, the fundamental problem is that the best predictor of long-term life outcome is IQ. Right. That's a real problem. Now, it's not that great a predictor. That's the first thing, is that if you're optimistic about IQ, you'd say that it predicts about 25% in the variance of long-term life outcome. And then other factors like conscientiousness, which is the next best predictor, it's a big 5 trait, accounts for about 9%, 10%, something like that. So the two best predictors combined only account for 35% of the difference in life outcome, leaving 65% for other factors, which is quite a lot. So those factors could include things like prejudice and systemic bias and so forth. But a lot of it's also luck and health and all the things that determine whether you fall off the edge of the world. The problem with IQ is that there's no damn way it's going away. And people say, well, IQ, it's not really good measure of intelligence. It's like, sorry, people, this is where it gets truly ugly, because there is no phenomena in social sciences, period, that is on firmer statistical and conceptual footing than IQ. We know, and there's no phenomena that's more robust. No matter if you give people tasks that involve abstraction, if you give people a set of tests that assess abstraction, and then you measure their average score on the set of tests of abstraction, and then you rank order them, you have an IQ measure. That's all you have to do. It's not any real different. The measure is no different than your average performance across a set of tasks that require abstraction.
The problem, as I say, you sort of come back to each time, is the manner in which people want to use the data, or the ends to which they wish to sort of find it useful. And the first thing is obviously that this is, it would seem to me to be obviously becoming a way in which some people on the right are trying to come back with very ugly ideas and very ugly prejudices of their own. The second is that it strikes me that the overemphasis on IQ by some people, I'm not saying by everybody, I'm not saying to neglect the literature, but that the overemphasis, among other things, makes this error of thinking that intelligence, as it were, the only important trait in human beings.
Well, I think the problem there is not exactly so much the definition of intelligence as the only important, what would you say, defining characteristic of human beings, but to conflate intelligence with value or moral virtue.
Yeah, and worth.
Right, yes, worth. That's the really pernicious element, is that there's an underlying assumption that if there are differences in people with regards to IQ, somehow there are differences in their worth.
Yes.
And there are differences in their economic worth, but that doesn't mean that there are differences in their intrinsic worth. And that's something that has to be very, very carefully laid out.
The novelist Ian McEwan once said that all.
And folks, that's really what it boils down to. To utilize IQ testing and to say that one group, because they test better, that their value is more, that their intrinsic worth is more, that their, that whatever it is, that they're sort of given a much better place in society just because of an IQ. Now, as Jordan pointed out, there is economic worth. There's no doubt about that. I mean, for example, somebody that's going to score well on an aptitude test, let's say, for whatever it is that you were testing for, you wouldn't give that job opportunity or whatever to somebody who tested very poorly on that. Let's say, for example, someone wants to do plumbing, and let's say you gave an IQ test for somebody in plumbing. Well, you wouldn't basically say, this guy scored well at the bottom of plumbing, but we're going to make him a plumber just because we need to do that to get enough plumbers from, both sides. We need to get some really smart plumbers and some really dumb plumbers. I mean, that may be a simplistic way of looking at it, but the fact of the matter is there is economic worth for people that score very high on aptitude tests. I mean, we see it all the time, jobs in terms of getting into the, better schools, all those things. So there's nothing, conceptually wrong with that. You study, you get the grades, you take the test, you score well, you get the fruits of your labor. But when you start messing around, as Douglas was sort of pointing out or intimating, that people on the far right, and I think it's a very small fringe. I don't think this is really going to go anywhere. I think Douglas is making a little bit too much of it, but you know what? He's been right on so many other things. So, it depends upon how much from the right, the far right, the alt right, and then you got to identify who those people are. I mean, how many are there in the world? 5 or 6? Count them. I mean, whenever you have a far right or alt right group that basically comes together, you've got 100 reporters and 2 or 3 guys with a couple of signs that say white power. That's about it. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasser Sheikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasser. If you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel, like, share, and follow us. You know what to do. Take a look at our other video links above and below. My final thought, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.